Welcome everyone to 30 Minutes of Wisdom, Rising in Consciousness and Mindfulness. My name is Oren Shai and I'll be your host. I am a coach and consultant and I'm joined here today, and I'm so grateful to be joined here today by Mona Farid-Nejad. Mona is a friend, is someone who I come to and trust around all matters organizational psychology, and specifically a compassionate and mindful lens on organizational psychology and change. And I'm grateful to have Mona here today with us for kind of a part two. So we initiated our conversation last time and we had a little cut off due to internet issues at the end. So we're going to pick up our conversation speaking all about resourcing ourselves for a changed workplace. And this is something that Mona, as the founder of UpLabs, which is a consulting firm that's building agile, compassionate organizations. This is something that Mona is so, I believe, primed to share with us. So Mona, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's jump into this topic, which I know is prescient for so many of us as we approach or have begun approaching re-entering into work in a way that is maybe a bit different than it was when we left the office, or when maybe other aspects of our organizations or our teams were not as mixed in terms of where we're working from and how we're working together. So around this topic of when we think about, we could just jump back in to this, the setting that we were in before, or the ways of working that we were in before. But part of what we're doing in this conversation around mindfulness is reflecting on, okay, how can I bring some intentionality to the way I come back to my work? How can I get reflective around what can I bring with me of value and learning and insight from the experience that we've all been through collectively? So I'd love to just start there generally, Mona, just hear from you around, as we think about resourcing ourselves for this changed workplace, what does that mean for you? What do you see in that?
There's quite a bit kind of going on with these changes. On the one hand, we've been on our own for a while, especially those of us who live alone or who haven't been around other people. And in some ways, as hard as that has been, it's also been a really big opportunity to reflect and to take time to be with ourselves in ways that I don't know that we would have made time for otherwise. So I would imagine that a lot of us have spent some time with our feelings and, what we like and what we don't like. But one of the things that in my work, working with companies and culture and stuff like that, one of the things that you realize that happens for both individuals and teams and organizations is that when the most profound change oftentimes stems from what we call critical incidents. Critical incidents are events in our lives that cause us to have to fundamentally change our status quo and the way that we're used to doing things. And if there were ever a critical incident in the lives of people, it's been this whole experience with COVID and having to all of a sudden go into quarantine and isolate, which is something that's not totally natural for us as human beings, considering that we're social creatures. So one of the things that can be really helpful here is really taking advantage of this time we have left before we fully transition back into the world as, to some degree how it was before, and really take a moment to reflect on, what is it that, going back to our life pre-pandemic and pre-quarantine, what were the elements of our day-to-day and our lives that we enjoyed and that we liked? What were maybe the elements that didn't quite bring us the things that we wanted? There's the famous growth mindset type questions of, what worked for me? What maybe didn't work so well for me? What can I learn from that? And what might I want to do differently moving forward? And you can do this around your time pre-quarantine, and you can do this around your time during quarantine even. As I've been talking with people about their experiences in quarantine and things like that, oftentimes what I hear is, I wish it were under better circumstances, and it's been hard and it's been a challenge, but there have been elements of things that people have enjoyed. For example, I can relate personally. I am very much enjoyed not having to commute every day. So it's really, this whole quarantine's really got me reflecting on how can I do less of that? Because I enjoy being able to have more time to actually focus on the things that are important to me instead of just sitting, behind the wheel of my car in traffic. I live in Los Angeles. So, really thinking about what worked and what hasn't, and being intentional about how you want to create your life moving forward and how you want to design your life moving forward, because these moments where we're making transitions, now that we're making this transition back into work and back into kind of the outer world, are real opportunities for change and new habits and new ways of being. And my hope for everyone here and well beyond is that we can start to approach life perhaps a little bit more intentionally instead of just having life happen to us. We can step out and decide for ourselves like what we want our life to look like, because I think we forget how much control we actually have over that and how much of an opportunity we do have to shape things in the direction we want. Yes, we can't shape everything, but there are some elements that we can change or improve to create more of the life we want instead of just the life that we're given.
Right. So there's a level of thoughtfulness that I'm hearing you speak to when it comes to entering into or moving through the changes that we are moving through. How to approach the moment with some intentionality behind taking stock of, okay, what did work for me during this time frame? What did not work for me, whether it was commuting or whether it was the way in which I was working, and not skipping that step where it is so tempting. And this is, as change practitioners, we see this, whether it's at the individual coaching level or at the group level. What we often do in our work culture is go right into, okay, where do we want to go and how are we going to get there, without necessarily taking stock of where are we starting from? What's actually present for us right now? And how can getting clear on what is present for us now support us in having clarity around what we want to hold out there as the ideal state we want to move toward? So speaking to this idea of when you're speaking to getting clarity or taking a moment to pay attention to what is really working for me and what is not, and the opportunity to look at, if I'm going to adapt to the new situation, whatever that looks like in my work, how do I pay attention to not only where do I want to go, but where am I coming from? So I would love to hear a little bit more from you around what are some ways that we can offer people just in terms of putting some structure around that reflection. Any thoughts that you might have around how to enter into that process and not just jump ahead into what that ideal state should be?
So, I mean, there's definitely a lot even managers can do. For those of you who are, managers and things like that, really one of the things that I notice is that, one, just culturally, we have this tendency to not be terribly reflective, but we also are especially that way when it comes to work. We're especially set in our ways when it comes to work. So as managers, taking a moment to be with your people and ask them these types of questions and really ask them, what has worked, what hasn't, what do we want to carry forward with us? What do we want to let go of? What do we want to modify? And using that as kind of this almost like after action review post quarantine of how we might want to do things differently. And for example, some of the ways that this can look is, setting greater boundaries or giving people more flexibility in how they do their work. So for example, being more stringent about people clocking out at a certain time and not just being at work until super late hours. Because one of the assumptions we tend to have, and I see this a lot in workplaces, is that we have this assumption that like butts and seats equals productivity. And that's not necessarily the case. And people aren't able to be productive for really long stretches of time. So one of the things we can do as managers is, ask people, what did you do to refresh and restore yourself while you were on quarantine so that you could concentrate and be your best self? Was it that you actually clocked out at the hours you were supposed to? Was it that you got up and exercised a little? Like, should we go on group walks in the afternoons? Whatever that is for you. And it should really be based on what you and your teams are dealing with and working through. What have you missed? Have you missed connecting with people? Is there a need to have some deliberate time to just connect with other people? For those of us who need that in our lives, like, how can we work that in? There's so many different ways you can go, but my core recommendation would be, especially if you're doing this as a group, really take into consideration the things that people are sharing, and really take into consideration even your own thoughts on what could be better, and really try to implement them. And we'll get more into it as we go, but yeah, there are definitely a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah. So just to reflect back a bit of what I'm hearing for those who are listening or watching is where we might typically, when we come back together in the setting that we were in prior to the past year and a half, where we might typically say, okay, how do we want to, or what support do we need to make this work for us? To start with, what was working for you? What wasn't working for you? And how do we take some of those lessons into the conversation around, now, how do we come together and take action based upon what we've all learned has been resourcing us over the what has been a fairly challenging time for many of us. And having that lens where we're not only looking at what do we need to do to go forward, but that those questions to give people an opportunity to share, here's the way I kind of adapted in the situation. And here's how we might be able to bring some of that adaptability to this new work setting. And so as we weave this in with the idea of bringing more mindfulness, infusing more mindfulness and intentionality into the way we show up across our teams, to the way we lead our teams, one of the questions we can explore is, how can we just allow ourselves some of the space, create some of the space as we are in this moment of transition, as our clients potentially are in this moment of transition? How can we build in a bit of space for that reflection on an ongoing basis, so that we don't take for granted the fact that, just like we are familiar with the change curve, we're familiar with, the kind of stop start that can be present when it comes to changes that we move through and the ebb and flow. How can we create some space for ourselves to keep checking in with each other, so that it's not a point in time of support? So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around that idea of continuous, ongoing attention, in recognition of the fact that there is no change that is one point in time. It is just about that critical incident, but it's about continuing to pay attention to how we want to adapt.
So apologies in advance, someone's dog is howling in the background. The joys of working from home.
Part of work from home.
But, I think one of the ways, I think habits are really important. I think we don't take them into consideration enough. Making a point of developing a habit, setting a place, like if-then rules of like, at such and such time on such and such days, I'm going to have this type of a reflection, or even holding yourself accountable, especially if you're doing this as a team. You can hold yourself accountable by making sure that you always schedule time for this before you part ways with your teams, so that you are being held accountable to showing up and actually embedding this reflection into the day-to-day. I'm not like, I've definitely done it where I'll schedule time with people to go over things so that I don't have the opportunity to be like, I'm tired today, I'm going to skip it. And just finding ways to hold yourself accountable. Social accountability can be really powerful.
Yeah. just like any other project that we likely have going on, we're going to book time in the calendar and make it happen. So much of this comes back to, is this a priority? Do we really believe it is important enough to have dedicated time to check in, to reset, to see what's, to your point about after action reviews, what's been working, what hasn't been working, what can we learn as we move forward, in recognition of the fact this is all ongoing. Change is a constant. And really, in my personal opinion, and from my experience in the high performing teams that I work with, this practice is built in. Mm-hmm. And this is long before, the past year and a half, this practice of checking in, seeing what we can learn from, seeing what we want to pull forward, that is a continuous practice. And there is explicit time on the calendar to have that conversation.
And the important thing is pulling in that learning and committing to new ways of doing things, right? So you can talk about it, and that can be really great. But really, that at the core of it, once you figure out what the lessons are, asking yourself continuously, what do you want to do moving forward? What's going to be different, right? Mm-hmm. What do you want to keep the same, and what do you want to do differently? And then committing to that, so that there's this constant, and this is one of the healthiest things that organizations can do, but they often don't. And by the way, this doesn't just have to be like your company doing it. This can be you, this can be your team. It can kind of be extrapolated to any level, is continuously taking opportunities to learn and then to incorporate that learning. So that way, even if things don't necessarily go your way, you're at least always taking lessons away from it and then committing to improving. And you see that over time, these like little, one-off commitments that you make, and I wouldn't overwhelm yourself with it. That's something I should warn you about. When you coach people, that's one of the things you realize is like people try to take on entirely too much all at once. So maybe commit to like one thing you want to do differently until it becomes a habit and a way of being. And then you can maybe incorporate something else, slowly over time. And that way you're not overwhelming yourself and setting yourself up for disappointment because you're taking on too much.
Such a good point. Such a good point. And something that's so easy, especially if you're operating within a fast-paced environment. There can be a sense of pride in taking on a lot and accomplishing a lot. Great. And when we're talking about bringing this more mindful approach to our work, that is more sustainable over time. It's just about a matter of coming back to, okay, if we are honest with ourselves in this present moment, how much is actually the right amount for us to take on and change? Because we've got changes happening around us all the time as well. And we can put some of the other things on the back burner and get to them. So this idea of change overwhelm, recognizing this, where are we starting from? Meaning not only where am I starting from as an individual or where are we starting from as a team, but what is going on around us? And what is the level of change that is happening around us? And kind of operating like an equalizer and adjusting in kind, where when there's a ton of change happening all around us, how do we maybe lower the amount of change that we are taking on in order to grow and evolve as a team and continue being in that practice of recognizing what is our capacity and feeling into what is our capacity for change right now. And so as we move from, okay, taking stock of where are we now in addition to where do we want to go, implementing practices that support us in not only saying, okay, here's where we want to go, and now we kind of just hope it happens, but actually, just like we approach our other projects, having owners, having dates, having check-ins, actually baking it into the way we work. But when we're talking about resourcing ourselves, so much of that is getting, especially in this mindful way, is looking at how can we bring more presence, more curiosity, more just play in the experimentation of it and openness to what might emerge. What are some of your thoughts around how to bring a little bit of a different lens to what can otherwise be, sometimes it can start to feel heavy, the continuous change?
Yeah. And, I thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point, right? If you're not in the mood for change and you can, and you don't want to take on a new thing right now, that's also great. Like, honor that, That's important. That's such an act of self-love of being like, you know what? This pandemic has been really hard for me and I'm exhausted and I need some rest. And maybe once I'm rested, I can revisit this idea of, taking on these personal changes and stuff. You don't have to do it now. And it's important to honor that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Now, as we're going back into the world, there's there's probably like some things we're really looking forward to. And then there's probably some things we're really not looking forward to. On the one hand, I don't know if anyone else is feeling this as you're starting to go back out. All the sensory stuff that we haven't had for such a long time is all of a sudden around. You're like around people again. And like, you're wondering whether like people want to hug or handshake or like not be anywhere near each other. It's a lot to take in, right? So on the one hand, I think that like we're going from the state of just kind of almost being entirely alone to all of a sudden being at 100% with other people again. And that can be overwhelming. So having a good grounding exercise that you do to just like bring yourself back down to center, because this can get overwhelming, is a good idea. So one of the things that you can do, for example, I learned this from my professor, Jeremy Hunter, who made me fall in love with mindfulness, is you can just take a moment to notice like the weight of your body in your seat, what it feels like to be seated when you're seated. You can feel the feeling of your feet on the ground. You can take slow, deep breaths. And this can help to kind of bring you back down to center. And then once you feel calm, not as overwhelmed, then you can, proceed with whatever it is that you have to do. But finding those ways to kind of come back to center. Happy to share some exercises too. Now, on the other side of it, where we're doing things that we are excited about, right? Like, I don't know about all of you. I'm a kind of a flaming extrovert. So I'm really looking forward to seeing people again. So for me, that's something that I'm really looking forward to. And I would imagine as social creatures, there's a lot of us that are looking forward to at least being with the people that we love, our family, things like that. And what can be really amazing and fun during this time is to really take these experiences and savor them. So Sharon Salzberg, I'm actually reading her book right now. It's called Real Love. It's awesome if you're interested in it. One of the things she says is that boredom stems from inattention. And what she means by that is that when we don't pay attention to the moments that we're in and the subtleties and the nuances of what makes them what they are, we oftentimes just like fall into default rest mode and we're not paying attention, and it causes things to feel really mundane and empty and boring. But when we bring our full attention to our experiences, it makes them feel more alive. We notice nuances and things that are special about the experience that we may not have taken in otherwise. So do we have time for like a little exercise?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So for those of you who are listening, if you can, maybe grab like a small snack or something if you have something close by. Like you can like chocolate, something, whatever you happen to have on hand. It doesn't have to be anything major. So I want to show you what it's like to savor and how you might savor by tapping into your senses. Because our senses help us to take in the world around us. And when we pay attention to how things make us feel and the nuances of things, we come to appreciate them a lot more. So if you have your snack on you and you're ready to go, what I'd like you to do is to start with your snack and take a moment and just look at it. What does it look like? For example, you might be looking at a walnut, right? You're like, yeah, it looks like a walnut. What am I supposed to, make of this, right? But take a moment and examine the nuances of this particular walnut. Where are the wrinkles and the folds? Is there anything special or different about this walnut that you maybe hadn't noticed? And then maybe pick it up and touch it. What does it feel like? really trying to give your full attention to the sensation of holding this walnut. Maybe roll it around in your fingers. Right? For some of you, you might be holding something that's maybe a little bit sticky or smooth. For some of you, you might be holding something that's maybe like a little powdery. Just try to tune into the sensation. And then maybe take whatever snack you happen to have. If you don't have your snack on you, if you're like me and you have your coffee near you, maybe take a moment, bring it up to yourself and just smell what it smells like using that sense. I don't know about all of you. I love the smell of coffee. Something we don't pay a lot of attention to as we're speeding through life. And then you can start to kind of place the snack or the coffee, whatever, you can start to actually place it in your mouth, maybe without chewing it or swallowing it right away, and notice what happens in your body. Does your body get excited at the idea of like new snack coming in or some coffee coming in? Is there joy in the body? Is there excitement? Whatever's coming up, just allow it to be. And then as you start to chew, notice what's happening. Notice the actual sensation of chewing on your food or having your coffee or your water like swooshing around in there. Something we don't often pay attention to. Maybe notice what your tongue is doing as you chew. Do it slowly so you don't accidentally bite your tongue. Notice what's happening in the body in anticipation of this treat. And then as you actually start to swallow whatever your snack or your beverage is, pay attention to it as it moves through your body. From your mouth to your throat, down your esophagus to your stomach. You might even be able to actually feel it. Like sometimes when I have a hot beverage, I can actually feel the warmth, right? Right? And especially when we're doing things that we enjoy, right? Sometimes people will even say like, I feel exactly one almond fuller. Or, we experience these moments of, real satiation. And this is something we can transfer into those things that we love. Anytime, if you like to go for walks, pay attention to the breeze on your skin, the feeling of your feet on the ground, any smells in the air that you may not have noticed before. If you are taking a moment to enjoy a friend you haven't seen in a long time or a family member you haven't seen in a long time, taking a moment to savor, their face and like the nuances in like, things you haven't noticed before. What does their skin look like? Are they sitting up tall? Are they looking happy? Are they maybe not looking so happy? Taking a moment to just kind of get curious and then noticing what happens in your body as you interact. I remember the first time I got together with someone again after quarantine, I felt this like overwhelming sense of joy in my body. It was really fun. And I got a chance to just like sit and savor that. I was like, wow, how much I appreciate these people in my life. So anything you can do as you go back into the world to just savor the things you enjoy, and to find grounding around the things that are maybe challenging, or maybe ask yourself, this is an opportunity for me to look at things differently, even around the things that we maybe don't like so much. What are the stories we're telling ourselves about them? And could we potentially consider a new way or a new story to tell ourselves about those situations?
Yes. So Mona, we're going to need to wrap up here, but I want to just thank you for taking us through that exercise and recognizing that this is a practice for us to come back to savoring and seeing what's in there for us with this change. So thank you so much, Mona.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here. 30 Minutes of Wisdom is every week at 2 p.m. Eastern. We will see you next time.